Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome. I hope you can hear me and see me. If you can't, please let me know. Welcome to another incredible episode of Outlandish Talmud Stories and Outstanding Life Lessons. This is part 7, titled How to Expand Your Universe. Yes, indeed. What does that even mean? Let's think about this. We are holding at a very unique time, special time in the Jewish calendar. Tonight begins Rosh Chodesh Av, the first of the month of Av, or Menachem Av as the month is known. And we know as this month begins, it's the beginning of the 9 days leading up to the tragedy of the destruction of the temple on Tisha B'Av. So these are days of increased mourning and reflection and some kind of safeguards to keep us safe during this precarious time. And we refrain from many pleasurable activities during these 9 days. At the same time, we're taught, especially by great spiritual Hasidic masters, that there are some pleasurable activities not only are we allowed to engage in, but we should engage in an increased way. And those are spiritually pleasurable activities, such as studying Torah, such as performing an extra mitzvah, such as doing another act of Ahavat Yisrael, helping somebody else, such as giving charity. These are the things that, as King David says in Tehillim, Pikudei Hashem Yishar Mesamchei Lev. These kinds of activities bring gladness to the heart, but this is permissible even during times of mourning, or actually is encouraged in an increased way during this time of year, because it will stand in good stead for us as a great schus that we shouldn't have to have Tisha B'Av this year. In fact, we should all be reunited in Jerusalem with the coming of Mashiach and the rebuilding of our temple. May it happen speedily in our days. So that's why we're gathered here to study Torah together tonight. I'm glad you're joining us now live, or you're watching this after. And as I mentioned last week, we began to study stories that are in a very famous section of the Talmud in Tractate Gittin, stories that what was going on leading up to the destruction of the temple, and then the actual destruction of Jerusalem, the temple, the Jewish people, many other cities, other wars and battles together with the Romans, great travesties in our history. And we studied one story last week, and this week we're fast forwarding in time a little bit, started right away. So listen carefully, follow along to the story. The place known as the King's Mountain, in Aramaic Tur Malka, was destroyed on account of a rooster and a hen. Right? How much damage can a rooster and a hen cause? Well, apparently it caused the destruction of the King's Mountain, and we'll find out the extent of that destruction in a moment. The details of what happened are as follows. It was customary in that place that when they would lead a bride and a groom to their wedding, they would take out a rooster and a hen before them, as if to say, in the manner of a good omen, be fruitful and multiply like chickens. So we all know that when you go to weddings and you see all kinds of different shtick, different customs, the bride is doing this, the groom is doing that, the parents are doing one thing, and the rabbi is doing something else. And every time you go to a Jewish wedding, although the basic structure should normally be the same because that's the halachic structure, but you see different customs. They're putting this on, they're taking this off, they're making this prayer, they're singing that song, they're going around in circles. And everyone always asks, I've never seen this before, what's going on? So as you can imagine, throughout our history, many different customs emerged. And they're all beautiful customs. I'm not saying you should be doing them all. You, in your family, in your community, have a tradition of how you get married and what you do. Your custom is great, and your custom is great. The birds and the fish, he gave them a special blessing. And the blessing was, Pru urevu, be fruitful and multiply, have lots of children. He gave the very same blessing on the 6th day to humans when humans were created, and that became a mitzvah to procreate, build family, have children. So I guess they wanted to do some kind of symbolism. They had a choice, the bird, the fish, the bird. They chose the chicken and the hen, the rooster and the hen, and that was the blessing for the bride and groom. Build a family, a healthy family, a beautiful family. So one day there was a chuppah going on, and they're going out in this procession with the rooster and the hen in front of them. One day, says the story, a troop of Roman soldiers passed by there while the wedding was taking place, and they grabbed the rooster and the hen from them. So the Romans were obviously trying to cause some trouble and disrupt the ceremony. They didn't like the fact that the Jews are having this liberty to perform the ceremony their way. They took the rooster and the hen. Now, what should the Jews have done? What would you do? And this is in line with something we discussed last week. A lot of these stories outline what seems to be a mistake in the reaction of the Jewish people to some of the hostility of the Romans. Now, there is a lesson to learn from this, although, of course, there's a lot of context involved as well. You have to know the context of the Jewish community at the time, the context of the Jewish subjugation to the Romans, the Roman power. And there was always these different factions, different groups. One group wanted to, be nice, don't make any noise, don't make trouble, let the Romans think we're good people. We are good people, but let them think we're good people and play along. And if we at their mercy, maybe they'll have compassion on us. There was another group of zealots on the other extreme who wanted to always wage war and fight back and not tolerate any of the Roman restriction and rule over the Jewish people. So there was a lot of this debate going on in the Jewish community. And there's a number of stories, which I'm not sure we're going to get to, of inner fighting among the Jewish people, which is sad. And it caused a lot of destruction internally. But the different views is obviously well understood and is something we can reflect on today. So here, what was the decision? The residents of the city fell upon them and beat them. They waged war. They fought back. It doesn't seem like it was a very large group of Roman soldiers, and there was probably a lot of Jewish people. And so they managed to kill those soldiers, or at least beat them up. So the soldiers, or these soldiers, or other soldiers who saw them, they came and they said to the emperor, in the Aramaic, the word is Caesar. Caesar means Caesar. Now, just a word about Caesar, when you see that in the Talmud, Caesar normally means the emperor. But when the Talmud talks about Caesar, it's not always the Roman emperor of the time, but it's often Roman generals, Roman leaders who were installed to govern certain places. They also have the title of Caesar. So here they come to the Caesar and they say, the Jews have rebelled against you. They just beat up an entire troop of Roman soldiers. The emperor said, yeah, well, let's show them. So the emperor then came against them in war. So now a large troop of many troops of soldiers came to completely defeat the residents on this King's Mountain. We'll soon see more about cities of this King's Mountain. Now, among the residents of the King's Mountain, there was a certain man named Bar Daroma. Daroma, it's an Aramaic word, but also in Hebrew, Darom means south. This was somebody from the south. And he was incredibly skilled. He was a great athlete. Listen to this. It says he could jump in one jump the distance of 1 mil. 1 mil is an Aramaic or an ancient Talmudic measure. 1 mil is 1,000 amot. 1,000 amot is also a Talmudic measure. The amma is approximately from the elbow to the top of the middle finger in an average person. It comes out to approximately centimeter-wise 48 centimeters, 48 to 50 centimeters. That's what I'm used to using the metric system, the normal system. And in inches, so I know that 2 amot is about a meter, so 2 amot is about 1.5 feet. So 1,000 amot comes out to a lot, right? That's a very large jump. He would definitely win the Guinness Book of Records, if it existed back then, for long jump. And now he used this talent because he could jump and he would kill many Romans. He would jump, nobody could catch him, and he had a spear or a sword in his hand. And on his way, he would surprise somebody and kill them, or on his way, he would chuck people up. And the Romans didn't know what to do with him. He was just killing Romans left, right, and center. They were afraid of him. So the emperor took his crown and set it on the ground as a sign of mourning. He put his head down and he turns to God. Interesting. The Roman emperor is trying to destroy the Jewish people, turns to the God of the Jewish people, and he says, Ribono shel olam, Master of the universe, if it is pleasing to you, do not give over that man, speaking about himself in third person, that's a euphemism, and his kingdom into the hands of only one man. Dear God, listen carefully what he was saying, and this is a common expression or a common sentiment by many of those who were trying to destroy the Jewish people. They said, we feel like we're agents of God. If God is allowing the Jews to be destroyed and God is bringing success to our ways, God is condoning, God is blessing what we're doing, which in fact, there's merit to that. God doesn't allow anyone or everyone to destroy the Jewish people. He only allows certain people, great nations, that he decides should be the ones to bring destruction among God's children. So he's telling God, if you want me to succeed, this one person is destroying my whole army. Please, you decide. It's either them or us. Well, what did God decide? So in the end, it was the words issuing from his own mouth that caused Bar Deroma to stumble. Bar Deroma brought about his own death, his own destruction. Why? Because he quoted a verse from Tehillim, from Psalms, from King David. And the verse, he turns to God and he says, "Have you not rejected us, O God, so that you not go forth, O God, with our hosts?" What does that mean? What was he trying to tell God? He's telling God, you've rejected us, and you, God, don't go forth together with us. And is that a bad? One moment. Thank you for your patience. Are you there on YouTube? Yeah. That verse must have merit. What's going on over here? What's it saying? So the Gemara answers, David added these as a question, wondering whether they were true, whereas Bar Deroma pronounced them as a statement of fact. King David turns to God and says, have you really rejected us? Are you not going along with us in our battles, in our times of trouble? He was saying it rhetorically, meaning, we know, God, that you haven't rejected us. We know that you're still with us, and we plead for you to be with us even more. Bar Deroma said it differently. Bar Deroma was a very talented rhetorically, meaning, we know, God, that you haven't rejected us. We know that you're still with us, and we plead for you to be with us even more. Bar Deroma said it differently. Bar Deroma was a very talented man. He was skillful. He was managing to kill Romans and protect himself, his family, the community. Bar Deroma turns to God and he says, God, I don't need you. We're managing fine on our own. You can reject us. You don't have to go forth with us. We're managing this on our own. He relied on his own strength, thinking he was invincible. He can bring about salvation to the Jewish people. And for that, he was punished. God tells him, you think you could do it on your own? You think you don't need my help? Well, listen what's going to happen to you. The Gemara recounts what happened to Bar Deroma. He entered a bathhouse, or an outhouse. A snake came and disemboweled him, and he died. A very unpleasant death. But look, he was so strong, but even the snake got to him. Meaning, right away, a lesson is, don't ever turn to God and think, it's okay, I'll do it on my own. Sometimes it's very challenging. Sometimes, when we're starting a business, or starting a marriage, and we're not sure how this is going to go, and we need a lot of assistance, and we're nervous, and we're anxious, and we're turning to God, and we're praying, and we start going to synagogue, and we start doing an extra mitzvah, because we need the blessings of success. But then what happens when the success comes, and the business starts to go really well? I'm really happily married. I got over my surgery. I'm healthy, thank God. And now we might say to ourselves, I didn't know I could do it. I'm okay on my own. And we may not say that clearly that way, but that's often our intention of what's going on. So we're forgetting about God, and we stop coming to synagogue, and we stop doing the mitzvah, and we stop turning to God every step of the way, thinking we can rely on our own strengths. And that's something the Torah refers to, somebody who relies on kochi v'otzem yodi, something my own strength and my own powers are able to make me succeed. God says you're going to find out very quickly that you can't do it on your own. If you're ready to turn to God during times of sorrow, tragedy, difficulty, and hardship, make sure you remember to turn to God during times of having together with the blessings of God. Now the emperor sees his prayer has been answered. He was praying to God, it's either Bar Deroma or us, because he's defeating us. What? He killed by the snake. So the emperor said, since a miracle was performed for me, because I had no part in Bar Deroma's death, we didn't kill him, you, God, killed him. So the truth is, I know now that this is our time. We're going to go and feed the Jewish people. However, not yet. I will let the rest of the people be this time. We're going to retreat, give them some space, and take no further action against them. Because I recognize God is being nice to me, so I'm going to give some favor and grace to the Jewish people. We'll be back at a later time. So he let them be, and he went on his way. Now, when the Jews saw that the Roman troops retreated, thinking now, maybe they've been spared, maybe they've been saved, the Romans have no interest anymore in destroying the Jewish people. They leapt about, they ate, they drank, and they partied. It was festivity. So many candles. Candles are very synonymous with parties, with celebrations. We know maybe at your wedding or in the synagogue or parties, we light candles. Now we have electricity and lights, but we still light candles. But especially in those days, we lit candles in the celebration. But they lit so many candles. This is a symbol how happy they were. That the bilyona, the image imprinted on a seal, was visible from a distance of 1 mil. Again, the measurement of 1 mil is coming up. It's a symbolic reference over here. Now the Roman army retreats 1 mil. so let's say a kilometer, a mile and a half away. And very often they would have rings, and their rings had these insignias, had these seals, which they would use to sign documents, etc., notarized. And it's in the dark at nighttime, you can't see anything on your ring. But the fire, the lights coming from those candles of the festivities of the Jewish people so far away, would illuminated the night that a mile and a half away, you could still see the insignia on the ring. That's how much they were rejoicing. So the emperor sees the kind of festivities. I'm sure he heard them as well. And he says, the Jews are rejoicing over me. They think they've defeated me. I gave them a break, but now they think they've defeated me. I'm changing my mind. So he went back and he came against them. He decides, we're going to fight war right now. What was the logistics? So Rav Asi says, listen carefully, 300,000 men, Roman troops, with drawn swords, entered the king's mountain and massacred its inhabitants for 3 days and 3 nights. And at the same time, on the other side of the mountain, it seems like there are actually many cities on King's Mountain. So whilst the one mountain of being decimated and killed by sword, men, women, and children, by the 300,000 Roman troops, the other side didn't hear about this. There was no YouTube clips, there was no live footage, there was no word and messaging going around, and they didn't hear about this. So the other side of the mountain, activities continued to be celebrated, and they didn't know about each other. Owing, that is another indication of the enormous size of King's Mountain. Think about a mountain that we know about that's very large and has many cities over it, and that was the dynamics of King's Mountain. Okay. So, and then eventually everybody was massacred over a few days and a few nights. And that led to the destruction of Hatur Malka, King's Mountain, all on account of the rooster and the hen, which the Romans took away at the wedding, and they beat up the Romans, and that's the story. Now, let's figure out the size of this mountain, the amount of people that were killed. The Gemara is very interested in this. The Gemara says, there's a verse in the scroll of Eicha. Eicha is the prophecy of Jeremiah of Yirmiyahu. Some of his prophecies that were made into a book on its own of scripture, the book of Eicha. It's the Megillah, it's the scroll that we read on the night of Tisha B'Av. If you go to the synagogue, you sit on the floor, you turn off the lights, you light candles, and in a very somber tune, the book of Eicha is read. So one of the verses in chapter 2 says as follows: the Lord swallowed up without pity all the inhabitants of Jacob. Everyone was swallowed up. What's that referring to? So it's related that when Ravin came from Israel to Babylonia, he said in the name of his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was a teacher in Israel. Ravin was a student who also had business in Babylon, import and export. He often traveled from Israel to Babylon back and forth. And when he was in Babylon, he would often come to the Bet Midrash, to the study halls, and pass on teachings and rulings from his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan. And this way, information between Israel and Babylon was being transferred. And so here's the teaching that he brings from Rabbi Yochanan to Babylon, and he says as follows. This verse in Eicha, talking about the habitations of Jacob being swallowed up without pity, it's referring to the 600,000 cities that King Yanai had in the King's Mountain. King Yanai, the famous or infamous king at the time, and it's a story for itself. King Yanai was a Sadducee. He wasn't from the traditional Jews. He was from the Jews that rejected a lot of the oral tradition. He had a lot of power. He managed to become king. He managed to become the high priest. He controlled many layers of leadership, and he brought a lot of internal destruction to the Jewish people. And he built 600,000 cities on this mountain. Now think about the size of this mountain now. Well, you're going to say, how many residents in each city? What's considered a city? So, as Rav Yehuda says, that Rav Asi says, King Yanai had 600,000 cities on King's Mountain, and each of these cities had a population as great as the number of those who left Egypt. How many Jews left Egypt? So one number that we know is that the Torah says there were males between 20 and 60, 600,000 of them. If you think broader, if that's just the males, then all males, older and younger, and all females and children, etc., we're probably talking about over 2 million people. Now, in each of these cities, there was at least 600,000 people. So there was 600,000 cities of 600,000 people. I'm going to let you do the math and figure out the population. And all of this was on one mountain, on King's Mountain. This was except for 3 cities, of which the population of was double the number of those who left Egypt. So 3 of those cities actually had 1.2 million or more people, which just adds to the staggering numbers to think about how you have a population this size and this amount of people who even lived. We're going to explore these 3 cities. I want to just add an interesting point. These numbers sometimes seem a little bit unbelievable. A lot of the commentaries say that oftentimes when you find in the Talmud and in Medrash, in rabbinic teachings, these staggering numbers, or a lot of even numbers when it comes to certain things, there's certain numbers that are used classically that are very symbolic numbers, but not necessarily precise, accurate numbers. They're symbolic of an exaggeration of large, huge amounts. So the number 4, the number 70, you find certain numbers that repeat itself in various situations, and it's not necessarily literal, but it's more a symbolism of the vast amount. So it could be here when we're saying 600,000 cities of 600,000 people, at least in each city, except for 3 which had 1.2 million. It may not be exact, but we are being told that King's Mountain had a huge Jewish population, and they were all destroyed in this story. What are those 3 cities? By the way, I'm going to skip this paragraph for now, but you can read it yourself. 3 of the cities had extra people, and you can read this on your own. We haven't got time for that paragraph. Now comes to the final paragraph, which is the teaching that I want to share with you today. Ola said, I myself saw that place. I saw Tur Malka, I saw King's Mountain. And it couldn't even hold 600,000 reeds. A reed. You're telling me Tur Malka was a big mountain with many cities with a huge population? It's a tiny mountain, small little hill. You can't even hold 600,000 plants. What are you saying? That there were so many Jewish people who lived there who were all massacred in this story? Ullah says, I don't understand what you're saying. So now, once this teaching has been taught, a certain heretic comes to Rabbi Hanina, and he says, you guys, you're a bunch of liars. You're a bunch of fraudsters. You lie with your exorbitant exaggerations. Ullah said that it's a tiny mountain. What are you saying? You're making up a story. Listen carefully, because we hear this argument in our generation. You're revising history. You're making up stories about millions who are being killed. It never happened. It couldn't have happened for this reason or for that reason. Chas v'shalom, that we have such people who are denying real stories of 6 million that we know who were killed. Here this heretic is saying there was no such thing as the massacre of the Jewish people on King's Mountain. It's a made-up story. So Rabbi Hanina answered something really interesting, and we're going to have to think about this. Rabbi Hanina said, you should know that with regards to Eretz Israel, with regards to Israel, there's a verse in the book of Daniel that refers to Israel as Eretz HaTzvi, the land of Tzvi. What is Tzvi? Which refers to the land of Israel. So we'll get to this Gemara's interpretation in a moment, but a bit of background over here. What does the word Tzvi mean? Today we have a name. It's a pretty common name, a name of Tzvi. My son's name is Tzvi, and others are called Tzvi also. The name is fairly recent, relatively. If you look throughout the Gemara, the Talmud, the Torah, if you look throughout all the way till, I would say, around the 10th, 11th century, there never was a person named Tzvi shown in one of the medieval commentaries. Sorry, we're getting a connection over here. So, oh, you're back. Okay, so what does this word Tzvi mean? So we do have Tzvi several times, many times in fact, in Scripture. And Tzvi seems to have 3 different interpretations. One interpretation for Tzvi is Tzvi means beauty. Sometimes we say Tzivyon, the many colors of beauty. So beauty is not when you have just one color. That's a little plain and bland. Many colors coming together in a cohesive way, in a pattern, it creates beauty. So Tzvi can mean beauty. Second interpretation, Tzvi can come also from a root word, somehow, the word ratzon, the word chemda, which means pleasure, desire, yearning, the will for something. Third interpretation for Tzvi, Tzvi is a deer. And in Scripture also, we know Tzvi referring to the animal, a deer. That's why you have a lot of names, Tzvi Hirsch, Tzvi being the Hebrew for deer, Hirsch being the Yiddish for deer. It was common that many names, the Yiddish was added to the Hebrew for the same name. Like, for example, Aryeh Leib. Aryeh Leib, also one of the name of one of my sons. Aryeh means a lion. Leib in Yiddish is a lion. And you have several examples. Dov, bear. Dov in Hebrew is a bear, and bear in Yiddish is a bear. So tzvi means a deer. Tzvi, the word tzvi is used in Scripture as a metaphor for three things. A metaphor for Israel, a metaphor for the Jewish people, and a metaphor for God. Now, the two interpretations that tzvi means beauty, that's a beautiful metaphor for God, for Israel, for the Jewish people. Tzvi meaning ratzon, desire. Well, also, God desires creation, desires his children, desires the world for us to do good things. We desire, we yearn for God to live our life's mission, to help another person. Israel, the land of desire, whether we're desiring to go back to Israel, whether being in Israel enhances our desire to do good. So those two interpretations we can understand. But the metaphor or the meaning of deer, why would God, Israel, and the Jewish people be compared to the deer? Here I'm going to give you briefly a collection of teachings from Talmud, from Medrash, about the metaphor of the deer. Now, the deer, it's a beautiful animal, and actually many religions turn to the deer as a metaphor for something spiritual, some even something holy. So we have in the Jewish tradition the deer as well. So for example, the Medrash says about Israel. Why is Israel compared to a deer? A deer is very quick. A deer runs. A deer is swift. We have a metaphor about a running swift like a deer. We're told, run towards a mitzvah, run towards a good deed, run towards the synagogue, the study hall, swift like a deer. Similarly, the land of Israel is quick to produce its produce, its fruits, its vegetables, its plant. Deer. Similarly, the land of Israel is quick to produce its produce, its fruits, its vegetables, its plants. This is even before the wonderful innovations of the drip system and all the other ways that we've managed to bring to bloom the Negev, the desert, the south. But apparently Israel always had in its soil, it was God's chosen land. So it was very fertile, quick to produce. Another metaphor about deer, apparently, those that enjoy deer meat, the venison. I'm not an expert in venison, but venison is known to be lean. The word in Hebrew, it's kal le'echol, it's lean and apparently easier to eat, to consume, to digest. And similarly, in Israel, the fruits and the vegetables and its produce are blessed in a certain way, some kind of nutrients they have, that they're more easily digestible and more beneficial for one's diet. That's why Israel is compared to the deer. Why the Jewish people compared to the deer? So one example, one metaphor is that the deer is an animal, sadly, that is very much pursued by predators. Okay, it makes a good lunch, and they're easy to catch somehow, especially their babies, the fawns. And similarly, the Jewish people have been a nation, sadly, that many nations throughout history have tried to pursue, persecute, and kill the Jewish people. The other metaphor about the deer is very quick. You see, it's quick to react. It's very alert all the time. And that is a metaphor for how we are or have been or need to be in order to survive and to live as Jewish people. We need to be quick, alert, on the ball, doing what we need to do and surviving. And also a deer is very graceful. We love to watch the deer, the way it runs and gallops and jumps. It's got a beauty to it. And that kind of grace is also a description about the beauty of the Jewish people. Why is Hashem compared to a deer? So the Medrash says that a deer sleeps differently than many other animals. When a deer goes to sleep, it always has one eye open. It never has two eyes closed. And the metaphor is that we say about God, Lo yanum v'lo yishan, shomer Yisrael, the God of Israel doesn't sleep nor slumber, is always watching out over us. Even if somehow God were to fall asleep, if God were to fall into a state of slumber for whatever reason, one eye is always open. The protection that God gives to his people, to us, is always there, even in a state of slumber. And there's other examples, other commentaries as well. So those are some beautiful ideas about the tzvi, about the deer, and how it refers to God, Israel, and the Jewish people. But in our passage in the Talmud, the Gemara is going to give a whole new explanation why in the book of Daniel he refers to Israel as Eretz HaTzvi, the land of the deer. And this explanation will come to answer the heretic's question to Rabbi Hanina: how could you say, how could you lie that King's Mountain had 600,000 cities with 600,000 people, When Allah went there and he said it's a tiny mountain that can't even fit 600,000 reeds or plants. So the Talmud explains, Rabbi Hanina explains. The metaphor as follows. Just as, I'm reading the last passage from the source sheet now. Just as the skin of a deer cannot hold its flesh, for after the animal is skinned, its hide shrinks. So too, with regards to Israel, when it is settled, it expands. But when it's not settled, it contracts. Meaning, simple meaning, if you've ever tried to skin a deer, so of course when the skin is on the deer, it fits perfectly. But it's different than other skins. It's very tightly stretched when it's on the deer. And if you were to skin the deer, flay the skin off the flesh, and then somehow try to put it back on, apparently on other animals you could probably do that because it fits. It just, the deer skin, you could never do that because when it's on the flesh, it expands, but when you take it off, it contracts. And once it contracts, you can never put it on again. And so therefore, Rabbi Hanina is telling us this is the metaphor, this is the explanation. When Allah went to visit those cities, it was after their destruction, after no Jewish people lived there anymore. And so the land contracted into a tiny piece of land. Nobody could even live there. But whilst the Jewish people were living there, as the Talmud says, when it was settled, it was like the flesh being in the skin being on the flesh, the land expanded so much that it could fit the 600,000 cities of 600,000 people. And that's the metaphor for the land of Israel. Something very interesting and something very beautiful is being said over here, especially when we ask ourselves today about overpopulation. We talk about the world, we're afraid of getting overpopulated, families have to be much smaller. Those families having so many children, what's going to happen? Thinking about Israel, all the people making aliyah, at what point will it become too full? How many people can you really fit in Israel? And there's a message going on over here. Israel can fit much more than you think. When it's being settled, it expands. Now, how do we explain this? What does it mean the land expands and the land contracts just like the skin of the deer? Is this literal? Is this a miracle? I mean, it might be a miracle. We have to understand the nature of space in a way. Maybe we can get a little bit into some quantum physics over here to understand how space works and the molecules and the dynamics of space. Can they stretch? Can they become larger, smaller? And what makes that happen? I want to give you two explanations. Very, very powerful ideas and very relevant to our times. There's a teaching in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. The Mishnah says there were always many miracles that happened in Jerusalem and in the temple. And one of the miracles was that we know on the great festivals, the major festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, all the Jewish people from the whole land of Israel made pilgrimage to come to the temple. And on Yom Kippur, everybody came to watch the high priest and to pray for him, make sure he did his service properly so we can all be forgiven. Imagine how squishy it was. Imagine how tightly packed it was. Men, women, children in different sections were crammed together because it wasn't such a large space. But what was the miracle? The Mishnah says, you recall that there were moments in the service of the high priest on Yom Kippur when he would proclaim God's great name, God's ineffable name. And at that moment, when he proclaimed God's name, everybody bowed down and fell on their faces and prostrated. We do that in the synagogue today. When during the Aleinu prayer, during the Musaf, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we open up the Ark and we say, or during describing the service of Yom Kippur, and we say, Meforash Yotzei Mipi Kohen Gadol, when the Kohen Gadol would utter the holy, ineffable name of God, everybody will bow down. And as we say those words, we bow down as well. And as we're bowing down in the synagogue, we're making sure we're in our place, looking behind us, looking in front of us. We don't want to kick the person behind us. We want to wait for the person in front of us to finish, maybe, so there's room for us. But here, we have a question. If everybody is so tightly packed in Jerusalem, like sardines, and then this name of God is proclaimed, and the Mishnah says everybody bow down, how does that even happen? Unless they took turns. But even if they took turns, where was there space to bow down? And they all bowed down together, apparently. But that was the miracle. When they stood, they were scorched, but when they bowed down, there was plenty of room. So a great commentary says as follows. when the Mishnah says, when they were omed, when they were standing firm, they were squished. But when they were koreh o mishtachaveh, when they bowed down, there was plenty of space. You know what that means? When we judge space in our lives, right? It's very relative sometimes to how we consider space. Is there room or isn't there room? Can you fit one more or not? You have room at the table or not? The room was jam-packed. It felt so squashy. It didn't feel squashy, even though so many people were there. What happens? Sometimes when there's a lot of people, sometimes you can feel really, really squashed, and sometimes you feel like there was plenty of space. If you went to a concert or you went to an event that you were enjoying and everybody was there and having a great time, you don't even recognize that it was squishy. But if you're going somewhere where you're not having a great time, maybe, you'll all of a sudden feel very... So we judge space very relatively. And so the Mishnah says as follows. When everybody was omed, when everybody was standing firm, when everybody was upright and firm and rigid, protecting their own space, everybody was trying to be themselves, assert their own identities, create this defensive walls around them, then it was very squishy. Then there wasn't space for many people. Then it felt tight. But the moment people let down their guard, the moment they were willing to bow down, the moment they were willing to let go and not extend their space so much, not manifest themselves so much, allow space for others in their lives, there was plenty of room for everybody. Everybody all of a sudden fit in. Sometimes you're sitting at a very full table and then an extra guest comes in, you weren't prepared. Is there room? Is there space? So the famous saying goes, if there's space in the heart, there's space at the table. It's really, really true. When there's somebody you want to be there, you'll always find room for someone to be there. But if somebody you don't really want to be there, you'll say, you look around and it really seems like there's no space. So we judge space very relatively. But the message here is about the way that you relate to others. And what kind of space is there? Sometimes the existence you take up in this earth doesn't allow for space for anybody else. You are so manifest. You're so controlling. You're so uptight about you, about your opinion, about your identity, that there really is no space for others over here. You dominate. And to create space for others, you have to start dominating. You have to start being a little more humble. You have to start not manifesting yourself so much. Not that you should disappear, not that you shouldn't exist either and lose your identity, because then you haven't created more space. You just replaced you with somebody else. But the fact that the two of you should coexist together, which is where we're seeing more space happens, requires humility, requires you to bend down a little bit, back off, and allow for another to exist as well. It's a very beautiful teaching that when we make, at the end of the Amidah in our prayers, we always make the peace prayer. What's the peace prayer? Oseh Shalom bin Ramav. May God who makes peace in the heavens, who Shalom Aleinu, may make peace among us as well. Well, we want peace. What do we do before we make that peace prayer? Something very symbolic. As you may know, you take 3 steps back. The first thing you do before you want to pray for peace is you walk backwards. When you're walking backwards, what are you saying? I'm retreating a little bit. I'm allowing for others to be in this room, to be in this conversation, to be in my world. I'm not consumed only by myself. I'm allowing myself to see and to empathize and recognize others as well. That's the first thing you need to do if you want to ask for peace. And the second thing we do, as you may know, is we bow our heads in all the directions. Oseh Shalom bin Ramav. We bow our heads to the people that are on the far right of us. We bow our heads on the people that are the far left of us. We bow our heads to those in the center, those in the middle. It doesn't matter where you're holding on the spectrum of politics, of religion, of spirituality, of who knows what. I bow. I allow space for you and space for you in this. As long as everybody's well-intentioned, there's space for everybody here. We can have a conversation with each other. It doesn't have to be my way or the highway. If you want to have peace, it can't be my way or the highway. If you want to have peace, it has to be our way. Not your way either or the highway. Our way together. Sometimes adults have a hard time with this. You know why? Why do fights go on for so long? Some people, 2 adults have a fight, and then 10 years later, they're still fighting, and then the kids are still fighting with each other, and the kids can't talk to each other, and the grandkids, and we don't go to each other's simchas, each other's weddings, we don't talk to their family, and at some point, even many years later, one of the children is going to ask, why are we in a fight with them? And they may answer, I don't even remember, I don't even know. So why are we in a fight with them? Fights linger because we want to be right. if you would have chosen to be peaceful, the fight could have gone away. Of course, on both sides. Of course, it takes two to tango. Of course, it's not as easy as I'm making it out to be, but that's the general recipe. If you're willing to take a few steps back and to stand in unity with others, there's space for everybody. But if you want to be you, assert your opinion, you have to be right, and you're intolerant of others, then there is no space. And that's what happened in the temple. When they stood firm, there was no space, but when they bowed, no space for everybody. And that is what the Talmud is saying over here. When the land is settled by people who are living together in harmony and unity, and they're loving each other, getting along with each other, respecting each other, tolerating each other, connecting with each other, no matter how different they are, there was room for 600,000 cities with 600,000 residents in each city. But the moment that there was not that unified entity in that space anymore, it contracted. There wasn't space for anybody. How much space does Israel have? As much space as we want it to have. There's always room for more people if we want the person to be there, if we want to let that person into our life. That is one beautiful answer and concept that relates to the land of Israel, explains the story of the Talmud, but it's more equally applicable in our life. Are we willing to pursue the path of peace? And the path of peace means you have to retreat, you have to bow your head, you have to allow space for others as well. And when you do that, there's room for everybody. When you think that a relationship is irreparable, sometimes it might be, but oftentimes it's irreparable because you don't really want to repair it. You want that person to agree with you. You want that person to think like you. You don't want to create peace. What's peace? Very interesting. If one person is dominating another person, you don't have any peace. You may have civility. Somebody may not be making any fights, but it's not because you have peace. It's because you have a dominance, one way or the other. It doesn't help for that dominating partner to now retreat and become invisible and allow the other to dominate. Again, you don't have peace. You just don't have a fight. Peace, by definition, is when you have two separate, different entities. Peace can only be created when you have two different opinions, when you have a potential for a disagreement, a fight, an argument. Now we're on the way to peace. That's the value of peace. Peace only can or could have been an argument and a fight. And that's the incredible beauty of peace. Peace is one of God's name. God's name is Shalom. And because Jewish people, we all think differently. We all have different opinions, and God created us that way. And we're not looking here to have one opinion, to be so monolithic. We're looking to have the presence of God in us, and that is achieved through peace. One final idea that I think could be explored scientifically as well, and those that are well-versed. Yeah, very good, Gary. Gary made a good point. God showed us this. When God wanted to create a world, at that original point, it was either God or us. It couldn't be both of us. God's space only happen if I'm contract my light, contract my space, my manifestation, and then that's the tzimtzum, and now he leaves room for somebody else. So God starts that relationship and then teaches us how to do it as well. Beautiful, Gary. Thank you for sharing that. Now, one more idea, and it's a story I want to share, and I'm sure those that are more well-versed in the quantum mechanics could probably explain this even better. There's a great rabbi in Israel. His name is Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. Rabbi Adin Even Israel. His Yiddish name is Steinsaltz. His Hebrew name is Even Israel. He's very renowned. He created the famous Steinsaltz Talmud, the translation and explanation of the Talmud, long before there were other explanations. And now the Koran reprinted it very beautifully. And he has many other books on Hasidic works and commentary on the Chumash. He's a very successful person. He's a little older now and he needs a refuah shlema. Many years ago, he went to have a yichidut, a private audience with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He needed to consult him for some guidance. And he told him, Rebbe, I have a problem. I am working overtime. I'm fully strapped. I'm overloaded with work. I have 3 full-time jobs. I'm a writer, a scholar, and I'm producing the Talmud and other books. That's one full-time job. I'm also running a school and a yeshiva in Israel. It's another full-time job. And I'm also running many organizations in Russia, educational institutions that he had. Rebbe, he said, I cannot manage anymore. And I feel like that I'm not giving my most to each one of them. So they're all being shortchanged because it's me running them all. And I'm asking for your guidance. Which one should I take on as my primary focus and invest myself in it? And then delegate and find more help to run the other projects of mine. That's the question he asked. What do you think the Rebbe answered? Typical fashion. The Rebbe said, not only should you stop doing any of those three, you should continue doing all three full-time with all your vigor. But I want you, a talented man like you, I want you to consider what additional projects you can take on to benefit the Jewish world or the world at large. Classic Lubavitcher Rebbe response. You want to do less, you got to do more. But he came out of that yichidot, that audience, and he said, I was thinking to myself, and he writes this in his book. I read the story, and I heard it from him also in person. He says, I think the explanation is as follows. In science, in quantum science, there's a theory that when you have a certain object, and when you apply enormous amount of pressure to that object, what it can do is, it can cause the atomic structure of that object to totally crumble and become redefined and take on a new identity, a new reality. And so what previously the atomic structure took up X amount of space, now no longer takes up that much space because it's become something new. It's changed its identity. It's now taking up much less space, and you've created space for more. I can't say I understand what I'm telling you, but these are the words that he used. So he said, the Rebbe was trying to tell me, you think you're maximizing your potential, you think you're overworking, you haven't gotten anywhere near your potential. You need to figure out how to bring enormous blessing, enormous light, enormous salvation in your life, inspiration, whereby you can position yourself that completely restructures your talents, restructures your time, restructures your efforts in a way that you can do all that and more. You're not doing it right, and if you do it right, you could be doing even more. Now, this is a lesson for perhaps time management and success with, organizing our days, our activities. If we did things better and cleverer, less work and more clever, we could be achieving more, and everybody who's dealing with time management issues knows about that. But he was also applying some kind of scientific measure to it and probably some kind of spiritual measure to it. In other words, when we look at a space, when we look at ourselves, and we look at an entity and we define and we size up, this is what it is, it may not always be like that. Or it could be changed. If you apply the right energy, the right pressure, the right inspiration, you could redefine what's happening there and emerge with a new state of existence. This can happen with us personally. This can happen with the land of Israel. This can happen in the community. This can happen in so many ways. Maybe what some of us have experienced this before, where we were in a certain mode, our lives are running a certain pattern, thinking we're exhausting all who we can be and can do. And then a new twist came in that completely redefined us and redefined the way we do things, the way we understood what's going on, and we found space for more. This is a recipe in healing relationships also. This is what's happening in the land of Israel. In the land of Israel, it may look like it's a certain size. And you may say on pen and paper, it can only fit X amount of people. And it can only achieve X amount of things. And it only has X amount of resources, right? What did people think in 1948, 1950s? What can Israel really achieve? What can happen in the Negev in the south over there? What's really the future for the Jewish people here? And look, 7 years later, we've discovered everybody is shocked. It's the miracle of the world. We achieved, we found opportunities and successes there we never imagined. There must have been some unique blessings coming our way, allowing us to redefine who we were, redefine how the land was, and then we can produce new things that way. I'll read the comment in a moment. So it depends what's happening in the land of Israel. If you have a unified community living there, doing what they should be, living as God wants them to, you could have enormous amounts of people doing amazing things with great successes, being a beautiful blessing to the universe. But if it's empty, if it's desolate, if it's not getting along, if there's no unity over there, it's not working cohesively, then you're back to square one. You're back to the previous definitions of reality, and those definitions don't allow for a lot of potential. If you want a task to be done, give it to a busy person and it will get done. Very, very, very true. A busy person has succeeded, hopefully, if they're busy in a good way, how to utilize their time, and they always find more time because they're not busy being busy. They're busy doing good. And a person who has a passion and interest to do good always finds ways and opportunities to do more good. But someone who's just trying to be busy, or busy running chaotically with their like a headless chicken and not knowing where they're going, obviously stay away. They haven't mastered this idea. So this is the teaching of the Talmud. This is why Israel is called the tzvi, the deer. In this Talmud, the metaphor to the deer skin. And what I want to take away for myself and for you is to reevaluate ourselves and reevaluate our potential and reevaluate the potential of our lives and reevaluate our relationships with others. And sometimes we've written off a certain person. We've written off a certain activity. Nah, this is over. We explored it. It didn't work. Tried to make amends. It didn't work. Reevaluate what we think the potential for Israel is today. Don't stop at those original evaluations. Think about the enormous potential that it could have if you could redefine and you could find new light in your life, new depth in your life and others' lives, that you could connect and make peace on levels you never knew were possible. And we could discover even greater beauty in the land of Israel with the peace among all communities. The kind of blessings that it could have for itself and for the rest of the world are enormous. It's a beautiful lesson during this time of the year. We need to increase in unity among each other. Never ride off any person, never ride off any potential. Always reconsider what can be done with the right inspiration, the right commitment, the right blessings, and the right dedication. Thank you for joining us, my friends. I want to wish you a good nacht, a good night, and Chodesh Tov, a good Chodesh. And I'll meet you next week, Tuesday night, same time. All the best. God bless you.